When a young boy was abandoned at a wildlife sanctuary, a lion named Blaze noticed him sobbing uncontrollably on the dirt path. This majestic, powerful creature locked eyes with the boy and let out a deafening roar before charging toward him. What happened next was nothing short of astonishing. Blaze moved in a wide circle around the boy, his golden mane glistening in the morning sun. The boy's cries grew louder, his small frame trembling. The sanctuary, nestled deep in the African savanna, was eerily quiet at this early hour. There was no one else in sight. Blaze, a massive male lion, paced back and forth with deliberate steps. His mane caught the soft breeze, giving him an even more formidable presence. Then he stopped abruptly and fixed his piercing gaze on the boy, who sat frozen on the ground. The child's tear-streaked face was red and swollen, his wide eyes locked on the lion's imposing figure. Blaze tilted his head upward and roared again, the sound echoing through the vast plains. He bared his sharp teeth in a display that could strike fear into the bravest of hearts. The dusty path offered the boy no escape, leaving him vulnerable to whatever the lion decided to do next. Blaze had been a resident of the sanctuary since his infancy, brought there by Jackson, a 30-year-old wildlife conservationist who had devoted his life to protecting endangered animals. Jackson had found Blaze as a tiny cub, curled up next to his mother's lifeless body after poachers had cruelly ended her life. Knowing the cub wouldn't survive without help, Jackson took him in. The task was daunting, Blaze required constant care, and Jackson often found himself waking up in the middle of the night to feed the tiny lion cub with a bottle. Having worked at the sanctuary since he was 18, Jackson knew how important it was to integrate Blaze into a pride before he became too accustomed to humans. The sprawling reserve housed several lion prides, each with its own dynamics. Jackson hoped that one of the experienced lionesses would adopt Blaze. When the cub was old enough and strong enough, Jackson introduced him to a lioness who had recently given birth to her fourth cub. She was known for being fiercely protective of her young but also remarkably gentle, a rare combination that Jackson prayed would ensure Blaze's acceptance. To his relief, the lioness welcomed Blaze as one of her own. Over the years, Jackson watched with pride as Blaze grew into a strong and capable lion. Like most male lions, Blaze eventually left the pride to live a solitary life, a dangerous transition in the wild. While the sanctuary provided safety from poachers, there were still threats. Blaze would need to navigate encounters with other dominant males, which could result in brutal battles for territory or mates. Blaze's journey to becoming a dominant male was not without challenges, but his courage, imposing size, and fearless attitude ensured his survival. Jackson kept a close eye on Blaze, tracking his movements whenever possible. The bond they shared made Blaze's progress all the more meaningful to Jackson, who had saved him during his most vulnerable moments. Though the sanctuary offered some advantages, life for the animals mirrored the natural order of the wild. Blaze had fought many battles to secure his place as one of the most dominant lions in the reserve. His victories weren't pretty, but they were a testament to his strength and resilience. Jackson often worried about Blaze, but he understood the importance of letting nature take its course. Despite the hardships, Blaze thrived in the sanctuary, his story a testament to the sanctuary's mission of preserving and protecting endangered wildlife. Unbeknownst to Jackson, Blaze was about to demonstrate a depth of instinct and connection that would leave the conservationist and the world astonished. As much as the sanctuary worked tirelessly to protect its animals from poachers, recent breaches had raised alarm among the staff. Despite their efforts to maintain strict boundaries, hunters had managed to infiltrate parts of the reserve. Though no animals had been harmed yet, the urgency to reinforce security was greater than ever. It was through one of these weakened perimeters that Blaze, the solitary lion, would find himself face to face with a crying child. Blaze stirred from his slumber as the sun began to rise, casting a golden glow over the vast savanna. Lions were most active during the cooler hours of the day, and his growling stomach reminded him it was time to hunt. Life outside a pride presented challenges, but Blaze had proven his resilience time and again. With a low rumble, the lion stretched, his massive paws pressing into the earth. Just as he prepared to head into the brush, an unusual sound reached his ears, a sharp cry carried on the breeze. His sharp senses picked up a faint but distinct scent, one that didn't belong to any animal in the sanctuary. Blaze froze, his ears twitching. Curious yet cautious, he followed the sound. As he moved through the tall grass, his golden mane caught the early sunlight, giving him a regal presence. Rounding a bend, Blaze stopped abruptly. There, sitting in the middle of the dirt road, was a small boy. His blue jacket was slightly too large, the hood pulled up over his head, and his tiny frame trembled with every sob. The child couldn't have been more than 3 years old, and his cries were loud and heart-wrenching. Blaze hesitated, his instincts warring within him. He kept his distance, his amber eyes fixed on the boy. Slowly, the lion began to circle the child, his movements cautious but deliberate. The little boy remained oblivious to Blaze's presence, his tear-streaked face buried in his small hands. Blaze's behavior grew increasingly restless. He began pacing back and forth, his tail twitching. The cries unsettled him, stirring something unfamiliar. Then, as if sensing danger, Blaze suddenly stopped in his tracks. A new scent had entered the air, one that sent a chill down his spine. The lion's hackles rose, and his golden eyes locked on the boy. With a deep, thunderous roar, Blaze bared his teeth, startling the child into silence. But as the boy looked up in terror, he realized Blaze wasn't staring at him, he was looking beyond him. Before the boy could react, Blaze charged forward, leaping over the child's head with astounding agility. A loud, bone-chilling thud followed. The boy turned to see another lion pinned to the ground beneath Blaze's massive weight. Blaze roared ferociously, swiping at the intruder with powerful claws. The two lions engaged in a tense and brutal struggle, their growls echoing across the empty savanna. Blaze's sheer strength and dominance quickly overpowered the other lion, who scrambled to free himself. Meanwhile, Jackson, the sanctuary ranger, was driving down the dirt road, unaware of the extraordinary scene unfolding ahead. As he rounded a corner, he was met with a sight that made his stomach drop, a small child sitting just feet away from two lions in a fierce battle. Jackson slammed his foot on the gas, urging his jeep forward at top speed. By the time Jackson neared the scene, the second lion had managed to limp away, his defeat marked by deep scratches across his flank. Blaze stood victorious, his chest heaving, and his fierce gaze turned back toward the boy. Jackson's heart raced. He loved Blaze, having raised him since he was a cub, but the sight of the lion so close to a vulnerable child filled him with dread. Any harm to the boy would not only be devastating but could also jeopardize the sanctuary itself. Jackson gripped the steering wheel, silently pleading for Blaze's restraint as he prepared to intervene. Jackson's heart pounded as he navigated the rugged terrain, the image of the abandoned child and the two lions etched vividly in his mind. Blaze, the lion he had rescued and raised, was now fully grown and had integrated into the reserve's ecosystem. Jackson had always been cautious, understanding the unpredictable nature of wild animals, even those he had nurtured. As he approached the scene, he couldn't shake the fear that Blaze might perceive the child as a threat or, worse, prey. Upon arrival, Jackson was met with a sight that defied all his expectations. Blaze, the formidable lion, was not acting aggressively. Instead, he lay beside the child, his massive body forming a protective barrier. The lion's eyes, usually sharp and vigilant, held a softness as he occasionally glanced at the boy, who had ceased crying and was now gently touching Blaze's mane with tiny, curious fingers. Jackson's mind raced, trying to comprehend the scene before him. Could Blaze be recalling his own past, the time when he was a vulnerable cub rescued by Jackson? Was there an innate recognition of innocence and helplessness that transcended species boundaries? Whatever the reason, the bond forming between the lion and the child was undeniable and astonishing. Taking a deep breath, Jackson knew he had to approach carefully. Blaze was still a wild animal, and any sudden movements could trigger an unintended reaction. He slowly exited his vehicle, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Hey, Blaze," he called softly, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. The lion's ears twitched at the familiar voice, and he turned his head slightly, acknowledging Jackson's presence without moving from his protective stance beside the child. "Good boy," Jackson murmured, inching closer. The child looked up, his eyes wide but no longer filled with fear. "Hey there, buddy," Jackson said gently, directing his attention to the boy. "I'm here to help. My name is Jackson." The boy blinked, his small hand still resting on Blaze's mane. "Lion," he whispered, a hint of awe in his voice. "Yes, that's Blaze," Jackson replied with a reassuring smile. "He's a friend." Blaze remained calm, his tail flicking lazily as Jackson closed the distance. Kneeling a few feet away, Jackson extended his hand toward the boy. "It's okay," he said softly. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The child hesitated, his gaze shifting between Jackson and Blaze. After a moment, he released his gentle grip on the lion's mane and reached out to Jackson, his trust evident despite the confusion of his circumstances. Carefully, Jackson lifted the boy into his arms, all the while maintaining eye contact with Blaze. "Thank you," he whispered, acknowledging the lion's unexpected guardianship. Blaze huffed softly, as if in response, before rising to his feet and retreating a few paces, giving Jackson space to return to his vehicle with the child. As he secured the boy in the passenger seat, Jackson couldn't help but marvel at the day's events. The bond between Blaze and the child was a testament to the profound connections that could exist between humans and animals, even in the wildest of settings. It was a reminder of the compassion and understanding that transcended species, a lesson Jackson would carry with him as he continued his work at the reserve. With one last glance at Blaze, who watched them from a distance, Jackson started the engine and headed back to the reserve's main facility, the child safe and the memory of the day's extraordinary events etched permanently in his heart. Where would he be in danger? Did the woman think the security cameras would be manned so the child would be picked up immediately? Did she assume a ranger would be nearby to rescue the child? Jackson guessed he'd never know all the answers to his questions. He was, of course, going to do everything in his power to find the little boy's parents, but something told him they were long gone. After reviewing the footage, Jackson made the little boy something to eat. The child had calmed down a bit, so Jackson decided now was a good time to try to get some information from him before contacting the authorities. The child, though, looked frightened and hesitant. The most Jackson could get out of him was that his name was Oliver. Jackson sighed, knowing difficult phone calls lay ahead. As he spoke to the authorities, he kept an eye on Oliver, who tentatively ate his food. The young ranger found himself struck by a curious thought. Years ago, he had rescued Blaze as a young cub when his mother had died. And now, he had witnessed that same lion protect a young child after his parents had abandoned him. It felt as though life had come full circle, but this time, there was no one to look after Oliver once he left Jackson's care. Unlike Blaze, who had grown up under Jackson's watchful eye, Oliver's path forward seemed uncertain and lonely. Jackson couldn't shake the sadness he felt as he thought about the desperation that must have driven Oliver's parents to leave him. The villagers around the reserve were often impoverished, and Jackson knew how difficult and expensive it could be to care for a child. He thought back to the footage of the young woman and how tenderly she kissed Oliver on the forehead before leaving. Despite the abandonment, there had been love in her actions. It made Jackson ache to think of what might happen to Oliver once he was taken away from the reserve. When the authorities arrived, Oliver was watching animal videos on Jackson's phone, giggling at the sight of lions and occasionally pointing outside, saying, "Lion," while trying to mimic a roar. Jackson couldn't help but laugh at the sight, though his heart felt heavy. He asked the authorities what would happen to Oliver, and they explained that if no family members could be found to take him, he would likely be placed in an orphanage in hopes of being adopted. It seemed like an overwhelming amount of change for such a small child. Jackson didn't want to imagine how that uncertainty and upheaval might affect Oliver. Before he could overthink it, Jackson heard himself volunteering to take care of Oliver while the authorities searched for his family. The authorities looked surprised, but nodded in agreement. For now, Oliver would have a place to stay, and Jackson felt a sense of relief, knowing the boy wouldn't face an unknown future alone. It was a bold decision, one Jackson wasn't entirely prepared for. He had no experience caring for a child, but there was something about Oliver that had captured his heart, much like Blaze had all those years ago. However, just a few days later, Jackson received heartbreaking news: Oliver's family couldn't be found. The authorities informed him that the little boy would have to go to an orphanage. Jackson stared at the boy, who was now sitting on the floor of the ranger station playing with a small toy car he'd been given. In such a short time, Oliver had settled in so well. Just the day before, Jackson had taken him on a ride through the reserve to see the lions. The boy's face had lit up with pure joy as he saw lion cubs chasing one another through the tall grass. The sound of Oliver's delighted squeals had been magical, and for the first time, Jackson had seen the reserve he loved so much through the innocent and curious eyes of a child. Jackson knew that as Oliver grew older, he would undoubtedly have questions about why he had been abandoned. No one would ever be able to give him all the answers, but Jackson wanted to be there to tell him one important truth: his parents, despite their desperate actions, had loved him. And Jackson would also be able to tell him about the brave lion, Blaze, who had protected him and saved his life. The decision was clear: there would be no orphanage for Oliver. Jackson resolved to adopt the boy and raise him as his own. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, though. The adoption process was long and filled with challenges, but Jackson was determined. Over the next few months, he completed the required paperwork, home visits, and interviews. His commitment never wavered, and finally, after what felt like an eternity, the adoption was approved. Oliver was officially his son. To celebrate the new chapter in their lives, Jackson took Oliver out for a drive through the reserve at sunset. As they cruised along the familiar dirt tracks, the little boy pressed his face against the window, excitedly pointing at the wildlife they passed. Not far from the spot where Oliver had been found, they saw Blaze lounging in the grass. The massive lion lazily lifted his head, locking eyes with Jackson. Blaze seemed to recognize the man who had saved him so many years ago, and now, another life. Jackson smiled, turning to Oliver. "That's Blaze," he said gently. "One day, I'll tell you all about him." With a rescued lion and child now forming his family, Jackson's life might have seemed unconventional to some, but he wouldn't have had it any other way. Blaze had shown courage and loyalty, and now Jackson had found his purpose in sharing that same love and bravery with Oliver. The story of Jackson, Blaze, and young Oliver teaches profound lessons about courage, compassion, and the interconnectedness of all living beings. At its core, the narrative reminds us that true bravery often involves stepping outside our comfort zones to help those in need, whether human or animal. Jackson's decision to care for Oliver, despite his lack of experience, demonstrates the transformative power of love and selflessness. In life, we may encounter challenges or responsibilities that feel overwhelming, but embracing them with a kind heart can lead to extraordinary outcomes. Blaze's protective instinct over Oliver highlights the importance of recognizing the bond between humans and animals. It teaches us to respect and nurture the natural world, as even the most fearsome creatures can act with tenderness and instinctive empathy when given a chance. This connection reminds us to treat all living things with dignity and care. The story also emphasizes the importance of resilience and finding hope even in the face of abandonment and uncertainty. It encourages us to be there for others, especially those who feel lost or forgotten, as our actions have the potential to change lives. The tale inspires us to act with kindness, firmly reinforces us that love and courage always lead to brighter beginnings.